Welcome back to Women Writers in Chinese History. This video focuses on the case of Concubine Ban Jieyu, a virtuous palace woman who was slandered by her rival in the inner palace. Our last video ends with an introduction of the cold palace, Lenggong, which is like a prison for women who had lost the emperor's favors, often due to vicious power struggles within the inner palace. Now let's look at the case of a virtuous palace woman who had suffered vicious accusations by her palace rival. She only barely escaped the fate of being locked up in the cold palace, or in worse scenarios, of dying a miserable death. Our case in point is Concubine Ban, a palace woman coming from the same lineage as Ban Zhao, the woman writer we have just discussed. Specifically, she was Ban Zhao's grand-aunt, and she was a consort of Emperor Cheng's. In historical records, she has been referred to as Ban Jieyu, Jieyu being her rank in Emperor Cheng's palace. Like Ban Zhao 2 generations later, Ban Jieyu, or Concubine Ban, was known for her learning and virtue. She was highly literate. And the famous story about her virtue was that she once refused to ride on the imperial carriage next to the emperor when he toured the palace garden. Now you may wonder why that action was even regarded virtuous. With this question in mind, let's read the story first. Once, when the emperor was disporting himself in the rare garden, he wanted the concubine to share his imperial conveyance. The concubine refused to do so, saying, "When I look at the pictures and paintings of ancient times, I notice that while the wise and sagely rulers all have famous ministers at their side, the last rulers of each of the 3 dynasties of ancient times are accompanied by their favorite women. If I were to share your conveyance, would that not too closely resemble these 3 last rulers?" The emperor admired her words and desisted. So, by refusing to ride next to the emperor, Ban Jieyu had in her mind lessons from history about past femme fatale who had caused the fall of dynasties, such as Daji, the concubine whose evils brought down the Shang dynasty, and Bao Si, the woman whose smile toppled the Western Zhou. She might also be thinking of teachings from Confucius, that is, a cultivated man and a responsible ruler should be more concerned with virtue, 德, than with pleasure, such as that coming from the female beauty, 色, even though too often the opposite case occurred in history. Of course, with this action, Ban Jieyu might be protecting her own reputation as well, so that her image would come down in history as that of a virtuous woman, instead of yet another alluring palace concubine who led the emperor astray. And indeed, Ban Jieyu's act of refusing the imperial conveyance, as the story came to be known, became an exemplary tale for later women, and is featured in influential books or artworks on female virtue, such as in the famous painting, Portraits of the Admonitions of the Instructress to the Court Ladies, 女史箴图 by Gu Kaizhi of the Eastern Jin dynasty. However, even though Ban Jieyu was celebrated as an exemplary case for female virtue in historical records, the emperor of the time, Emperor Cheng, eventually got tired of her impeccable demeanors and became fond of a different type of woman, that is, a seductive dancer named Zhao Feiyan. Zhao is her surname, and her name Feiyan literally means the flying swallow. We don't know much about Zhao Feiyan's background, except that she came from a commoner's family and attracted the emperor with her dance. Later, both she and her sister entered the palace as concubines. Soon becoming Emperor Cheng's favorite, Zhao Feiyan took an aggressive step to climb up the ladder of the palace ranks. That is, she accused both Empress Xu, the leading lady of the inner palace, and concubine Ban, who had been enjoying the emperor's affections and a high status in the inner palace, of a serious crime, that is, of practicing witchcraft to curse herself and the emperor. To supply a related background, witchcraft in traditional China was quite similar to voodoo. A straw or cloth doll or a paper cutout could represent the person who is cursed and sometimes bear his or her name. Sometimes needles are placed on the doll or cutout with the purpose to make the cursed person ill and die. Accusing their palace rivals of witchcraft was a common ploy in the vicious struggles of the inner palace and could lead to very serious punishments if the charges were taken as true, since witchcraft was considered a capital crime, especially when the target was the emperor. By launching those charges against Empress Xu and concubine Ban, Zhao Feiyan was very much expecting those women to die a miserable death. Likely owing to the emperor's partiality to Zhao Feiyan, he accepted those charges as true. Empress Xu did not suffer a punishment as severe as death, but was deprived of her title and reduced to commoner status. And soon enough, Zhao Feiyan got what she wished for. She became the new empress of Emperor Cheng. And what happened to concubine Ban? As her biography records, at the critical juncture of being questioned for her alleged crime, she thus replied, "I have learned that life and death depend on fate. Riches and status rest with heaven. If one cannot be assured of blessings by doing what is right, what can one hope for by harboring evil desires?" And as she continued, "If the ghosts and gods are aware of our doings, they will not entertain such a disloyal request. And if they're not aware of our doings, what will I gain from making such a request? Therefore, I didn't do it." The emperor found her answer admirable, took pity on her, and gifted her with 100 ounces of yellow gold. In this eloquent self-defense, concubine Ban assumed that the supernatural world is essentially benevolent and just. Her notion was likely based on the Confucian principle of a benevolent heaven. Impressed by concubine Ban's virtue and intelligence, the emperor pardoned her and even gifted her with lots of gold. Perhaps he had not entirely lost his affection for her. However, to protect herself from vicious palace struggles, concubine Ban volunteered to serve the Empress Dowager in another quarter of the palace and spend the rest of her life there. Although concubine Ban acted modestly due to her adherence to ritual principles, she was not without resentment about her situation. Her biography includes a rhapsody or fugue piece that expresses her discontent. Since it's from a historical record composed close to her lifetime, the rhapsody is likely her authentic composition. Notably, her rhapsody opens with a statement that attributes her virtue to her family lineage. That is, in her words, "Having inherited the virtue of my grandfather and father, how pure and numinous is my nature and fate. 承祖考之遗德兮，和性命之殊灵." These lines express the pride of someone with a prestigious background and possibly a family tradition in which women were thoroughly educated in the classical tradition. Likely the same family tradition cultivated Concubine Ban's famous grandniece, Ban Zhao. Then, in the middle of this rhapsody, Concubine Ban evokes the images of virtuous women from the past as her role models, while condemning power-grabbing and seductive women in history, similar to Zhao Feiyan. For this theme, we can read the following lines from Concubine Ban's Rhapsody. I set out pictures of great women to serve as my models, consulted their histories, and questioned the odes, that is the book of poetry. Saddened by the alarming instance of the morning hen, I lamented the crimes of the seductive Bao Si. 臣女徒而敬见兮，故女史而问诗。悲臣妇之作戒兮，哀褒彦之为由。These lines are full of classical allusions. First, the line consulted their histories and questioned the odes refers to Concubine Ban's reading of the odes or the book of history, 诗经. We have mentioned this book as the fountainhead of Chinese lyrical poetry. This ancient poetic anthology dating to the Western Zhou was also said to have been compiled by Confucius and became a revered classic in the Confucian tradition. The poems in the collection include those written in the voice of slandered palace women, and Concubine Ban clearly saw her own image in those past examples. On the other hand, her rhapsody condemns women like Zhao Feiyan with the metaphor of the morning hen, that is, a hen that crows. This has been a metaphor for palace women meddling in court politics, as if they have perverted the law of nature. Although this metaphor is quite misogynist, it's understandable why Concubine Ban would be resentful of this type of palace woman, given her orthodox upbringing and her personal experience. Along with the image of the morning hen, she also evokes the image of the femme fatale Bao Si, who was blamed for the fall of Western Zhou. If you still remember, according to popular accounts, the king played a foolish joke on his vassals to make Bao Si smile, resulting in the ruin of the dynasty when a military invasion took place. Here, by recalling the image of Bao Si, Concubine Ban must have the seductive image of Zhao Feiyan in mind. Concubine Ban's Rhapsody clearly separates the good women from the bad women, while manifesting both her moral principles and her classical learning. We don't need to agree with Concubine Ban's gender perspective or her self-righteousness. However, we may sympathize with her experience and admire her calmness and intelligence when facing deadly accusations. Whereas the Rhapsody in her biography is likely an authentic piece by her, the same can't be said to a widely known poem titled Resentment, 怨歌, attributed to her during the later ages. Why should we say that? First of all, the poem first appears in an anthology compiled during the 6th century. That's more than 500 years after Concubine Ban's death. No earlier signs of the poem can be found. Second, it's a 5-character poem, or 五言诗. That is to say, the lines are regular with 5 characters each, and they have end rhymes every other line. This poetic form was not yet established during Concubine Ban's lifetime, during which the rhapsody or fu remained the predominant form for poetry. With this context in mind, let's read the poem itself and see if it sounds authentic to you in representing the feelings of an abandoned woman. As you are going to note, the whole poem is built on the metaphor of a round fan, similar to the image shown here, which becomes useless to the owner after the summer heat is gone. And here goes the poem. Newly cut white silken gauze from Qi, as fresh and pure as frost or snow, was made into a double pleasure fan, as perfectly round as the fullest moon. 新列其完素，鲜洁如霜雪，才为合欢扇，团团似明月。Inside and out, you take me with you. You wave me, I stir up a gentle breeze. But how I fear that when the fall arrives, and chill winds steal away the summer heat, I'll be discarded, stored away in a box, and your love for me broken off midway. 初入君怀袖，动摇微风发，常恐秋节至。凉标夺炎热，弃捐妾寺中，恩情终道绝。 So what do you think? Do you like this poem? Do you think it's written by a woman? How do you like its central metaphor, the abandoned fan? I look forward to your comments on these questions. In traditional China, the poem became extremely popular and circulated alongside the story of Concubine Ban's loss of favor due to the schemes of Zhao Feiyan. It had been taken as an authentic composition by Concubine Ban, and its authorship was questioned only during modern times. Perhaps the power of the poem in the traditional setting stemmed from its expression of the total dependence of one party on another, that is, the fan on its owner, similar to women's dependence on the favors of men, or a male scholar's dependence on the favors of the emperor. The motif of the change of seasons and the passing of time may also speak to the fundamental sadness within the human condition itself. Touching on all these themes, the poem could evoke multiple meanings in the minds of the reader. Another interesting context for the poem is that the anthology in which it first appears is the famous Wenxuan, Selections of Refined Literature. The compilation of this anthology was a major cultural project that took place during the 6th century at the court of the Liang dynasty, one of the southern dynasties after the fall of the Han. The purpose of these selections was to establish a model of fine literature, including both poetry and prose writings, and the anthology indeed achieved this paradigmatic influence in Chinese literary history. Wenxuan was compiled according to an orthodox Confucian perspective, and there were very few pieces attributed to women writers in this anthology. One Rhapsody written by Ban Zhao got included. Other than that, the only other piece attributed to a woman is this poem, Resentment, even though we have mentioned its authorship is highly questionable. About a generation after Wenxuan, Selections of Refined Literature, another influential literary anthology was compiled under the Liang court sponsorship, that is, Yutai Xinyong, New Songs from the Jade Terrace. Concubine Ban's Resentment is also included there. In contrast to the Confucian principles underlying the earlier anthology, New Songs from the Jade Terrace alleged purpose was to entertain the women in the palace, and was meant to be performed by female musicians at the palace. Jade Terrace refers to mirror stands in the palace chambers, evoking the feminine atmosphere of a boudoir. The pieces included in the book are predominantly love poems, often featuring the image of a woman languishing due to love sickness. Many of these poems were written by men, but also quite a few attributed to women. Poems in the anthology established the so-called palace-style poetry, 宫体诗. From an orthodox cultural perspective, palace-style poetry has been described as decadent. Yet the emergence of this style in new songs from the Jade Terrace is an important indication of the art for art's sake literary philosophy on the rise during the Southern dynasties, which we'll discuss more later. When included in new songs from the Jade Terrace, Concubine Ban's resentment is appreciated more as a love poem and the work of a woman, in contrast to its moral implications in selections of refined literature. In this manner, the poem performed an interesting crossing between what were then demarcated as masculine and feminine cultural domains. However, as we have mentioned, the attribution of the poem to Concubine Ban is questionable. The same applies to many other poems attributed to women in the anthology. Even though some pieces were more veritably penned by women, in particular those living during the period. The book's alleged female readership is also very notable for our class. However, it's difficult for us to track down women's reading of the book due to a lack of sources. But we do know that the anthology was widely read by men and provided a kind of escape for male readers from their socio-political duties. Poems from the book were also performed by sing-song girls or courtesans to male patrons in entertainment quarters and offered a model of later poems of similar themes. As to Concubine Ban's resentment, it became widely known due to its inclusion in two influential poetry anthologies. The image of the abandoned fan is frequently evoked in later poetry as a metaphor for the abandoned woman. Furthermore, there has been this tradition of poetic comment, 贺诗, in Chinese literature, meaning that poets would write their own version of poem based on a famous story or poem from the past. You may think about it as a kind of role play through poetic writing. And here we in fact have an interesting pair of poems written in the voice of Concubine Ban. Their authors were siblings in a literary family from the Liang dynasty. One was a man and the other was a woman. A final food for thought, I hope that you can read these poems and make a quick call as to which poem was written by the brother and which was written by the sister. Try not to search up anything and just choose based on your gut feelings. Fill the anonymous poll beneath this video on Canvas and we'll view the results in class as an experiment to see if there are indeed literary clues for detecting women's writing and if there is any consensus on those clues. Here goes the first poem. The sun had set, the gate is surely closed, and sorrowful thoughts rise in 100 ways, the more so as the emperor's palace is so near. The breeze carries the sounds of song and music. I do not hate him for his change of heart, but that false slander was simply too cruel. I could only appeal to principle in my defense. I'm not jealous of her Zhao Feiyan's waist, however slim. 日落应门闭，愁思百端生。况复朝阳尽，风传歌吹声。宠疑终不恨，缠网太无情。只言争分离，飞渡舞妖卿。And here is the second poem. Inside the locked gate, silence reigns. It's not the inner palace anymore. Not only that, it now is verdant spring, and grasses presently grow lush and green. I may be likened to a fan in autumn, since you no longer deign to visit me. Who still remembers how this humble maid refused to ride with you in your conveyance? 英文既已毕，非复后庭时。况在青春日，萋萋绿草姿。妾身似秋扇，君恩绝履期。聚意犹轻捻，从今见妾辞。So, have you made your decision yet? I look forward to your feedback at the poll. And this is the end of the presentation. Please remember to complete the quiz beneath this video, and then move on to the next video on one of the most legendary female figures in Chinese history, Wang Zhaojun.